Well, good morning. Welcome to Memorial Road. I'm so glad you're here. Okay, Neil, your socks or my haircut, which is the bad thing of those two? Man, it's so exciting to have the students coming back. I know this seems really, really early to you, and it is really early. But let me tell you, come November, when the semester ends the week before Thanksgiving, we will all be very, very excited about that. It'll be the most relaxing Thanksgiving break our students have had in a long, long time. Okay, so, man, Darla and I, we love our Q group. It's a special group of people. We are dear friends with them. We love to catch up and hear about family. We love to talk about spiritual things. About 3 weeks ago, our Q group was together, and one of the members said, hey, I think we ought to go on a trip together. And everybody thought that sounded like a good idea. And they said, let's go to this particular town. That sounded good. And then they said, and let's go to this church so we can hear this preacher. And that sounded pretty good to everybody. And then another person said, let's make sure that preacher is preaching that day and it's not some random guy that gets up there. And that's when Darla leaned over to me and said, hey, John, when you preach at Memorial Road, you're that random guy that nobody comes to listen to. I'm really honored to have the chance to speak for a couple minutes. So I want to ask a question of you, and really this first question is kind of the intro question. It's the second question that I really want to focus on today. Have you ever walked into a setting or into a particular environment and you thought, this is perfect for me? These are the right people. These are the right emotions going on. This is the right time. This is where I belong. Now, I think we've probably all had that from time to time. But I tell you, what we can probably answer, at least I can answer most to, is the question, have you ever walked into a setting or an environment and it just didn't feel good? You really did not fit in. Somebody says something that's just not right. You are not in the right place with the right people at the right time, and you feel uncomfortable. Well, brothers and sisters, I think the people of God from the very beginning have probably, in the world, have felt more uncomfortable than comfortable. And I think that's the time today. So, there are 3 stories out of the Bible that I want to tell you and talk about 3 different times where maybe you feel as uncomfortable as I do, and where we can find comfort. So the first situation that I walk into that things just feel uncomfortable is somebody says something that is critical or is threatening or is mean or I'm just not ready for. About 4 weeks ago, I went to a doctor's office, had an appointment. It was actually one of our doctors that attends church here at Memorial Road. I walk into the waiting room, and there's a young dad. He's probably in his early 30s, and he has a very energetic, active son, probably a 3-year-old. And this guy is all over the room, and he's jumping on an ottoman. I mean, he's just going everywhere. And then he freezes, and he looks up at me, and he gets this big smile on his face, and he says, "Papa!" And the dad says, "Oh, man, listen, I'm really sorry. Every time he sees a really old guy, he thinks he's a papa." Man, and he could tell by the look on my face that and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say it like that." Every time he sees somebody who's way older than I am, he says, "Papa." Dude, you're not getting any better here, okay? This isn't helping. 3 of the most exciting chapters in the Old Testament talk about some great, great victories that a man of God has with the power of God. And as he's riding this wave of really great success and victory, somebody says one thing to him, and it changes everything for the negative. He is so uncomfortable, it's unbelievable. So, the king of Israel was a guy named Ahab. Scripture says that Ahab was the most evil of all the kings that had gone before him, and he married an evil queen, Jezebel. 1 Kings 17, Elijah, the prophet of God, goes to Ahab and says, I am following God, and I am going to pray, and the rain and the dew will stop until I pray again for it. By the way, we learn in James that Elijah was a man just like us, James 5:17. And sure enough, the rain and the dew stops. God commands Elijah, okay, you need to go to Kerith Ravine, and you need to hide out there. You're going to have water from the brook, and I'm going to feed you every day. I'm going to send ravens to you, and they're going to take meat and bread in the morning, and they're going to show back up in the evening with meat and bread for you. Already Elijah has had two great victories. He has stopped the rain and all the dew, and now he is hidden away, and God is sending birds to feed him. Well, he is so effective in his prayer about the drought that the brook dries up, and God then tells him, go to Zarephath. That's a town not too far away. Go there and find a widow, and that widow will feed you. So Elijah goes to Zarephath. He's at the city gates. He sees a widow who is picking up sticks, and he says, may I have a drink of water? And she provides a drink of water. And then he says, and can I also have a cake of bread? And the widow tells him, all I have left is this jug of a little bit of oil and this jar that has a little bit of flour, a handful of flour. I'm picking up sticks to go back and prepare a final meal for my son and I before we die. And Elijah says, if you'll do what I have asked, God will provide an unending source of flour and oil for you until the rains come back. And she does that. And he lives in the upstairs room of her home, and during the drought, that small bit of flour and that small bit of oil lasted the entire time. A third great victory for Elijah. The widow's son passes away. He gets sick and sicker and sicker, and then he dies. And the widow can't believe that, and she says, I can't believe you have come to judge my sin and to take my son. Well, Elijah was so broken up by that he took the body of the son, took him into his upstairs room, and prayed to God 3 times, and laid himself on the son 3 times, and asked God to put life back in him, and God did. Elijah took the son back to his mother, and she said, I know you're a man of God, and I know the words of the Lord that come from your mouth are truth. What unbelievable successes Elijah has. Well, in the 3rd year, he decides that it's time to return back to King Ahab. So as chapter 18 of 1 Kings begins, Elijah is going back to find the king, and he runs into Obadiah. Now, Obadiah is the king's right-hand man. Obadiah is a follower of God. Obadiah, in fact, has hidden 100 priests of God, 50 each, in 2 caves. And he feeds them and provides them water to keep them alive because Queen Jezebel has been killing God's priests. Obadiah is so excited to see Elijah, and Elijah says, go tell the king I want to see him. But Obadiah doesn't want to do that because he says, I'll go and tell the king that you're here, but the Spirit of the Lord might take you somewhere else, and then King Ahab will kill me. And Elijah says, no, I want to see the king, and I promise you I will see him today. So Elijah encounters King Ahab. King Ahab says, is that you troubler of our nation? And Elijah kind of gives him that back and says, it's not me that's the troubler of this nation, it's you and your family. And then Elijah says, the people are of mixed opinion. If the Lord is the Lord, let them worship him. But if Baal is the Lord, let them worship Baal. So King Ahab, bring in the priests of Baal, and let's have a contest between the 450 priests of Baal and myself, and we will see whether God is God or whether Baal is God. And this seemed like a good idea to King Ahab. Not a very wise fella, I don't believe, at this point. So they meet on Mount Carmel, 450 priests of Baal and Elijah. And the king has sent word out all throughout the country, so many people have gathered here together. And Elijah says, okay, priests of Baal, you can go first. You take one bull and prepare it for sacrifice. I will take the other and prepare it for sacrifice. Don't light the fire. You let your God provide the fire, and then I will let my God provide the fire for my sacrifice, and we'll see who is the true God. You know the story. The priests of Baal, the 450 of them, that morning began dancing around and calling upon their god Baal to light the fire and consume their sacrifice. About noon, Elijah has finally decided he's going to start taunting these guys because nothing is happening. He says, hey, maybe your god Baal is traveling, or maybe he's busy and can't be bothered, or maybe he's asleep. Why don't you yell a little bit louder? And they begin to do that. They start cutting themselves with swords and spears. That was part of their religious practice, and the blood flowed. And nighttime came, and still nothing had happened, and Elijah says, it's my turn. He takes 12 stones, one representing each of the tribes of Israel, and places them around the carcass of the bull. He then digs a trench around that. There are 4 large jars full of water, and he says, pour that on my sacrifice, and do that 2 more times. The water was flowing and the trench was full, and then he prayed to God, and God sent fire and burned everything up right then. And the people said, God is God. The priests of Baal were gathered together down in the valley, and they were no more. And then Elijah goes to King Ahab and says, you should eat and drink, for I hear the sound of heavy rain. He then goes back up on the mountain. He gets on his knees. He begins to pray. And his servant is there with him. And as he prays and asks God to bring rain, he mentions to his servant, do you see any clouds? Look past the sea. And his servant says, no, nothing. Elijah continues to pray. 7 times he asks his servant to look for the cloud. And on the 7th time, the servant says, well, I see a cloud about the size of a man's fist. And with that, Elijah jumps up and says, tell the king he needs to head to Jezreel as fast as he can, otherwise the rain will stop his chariot and horses. And the Spirit of God came upon Elijah in a special way, and he began to run. In fact, he ran so fast, he outran the king in the chariot pulled by horses getting to Jezreel. Chapter 19 begins. Now remember, Elijah has had victory after victory after victory. King Ahab tells his queen what has happened and how the 450 priests of Baal are no more. And she sends word to Elijah and says this, by this time tomorrow, you will just be like one of them. I will have killed you. And Elijah loses it. He loses all confidence. He loses everything that he thought that he had, and he runs away. He runs away into the desert and prays to God to take his life. An angel of God wakes him up, and the angel says, here, eat this bread that has just been prepared for you and drink. And so Elijah does that, and then he falls back asleep, having asked God to take his life. A second time, the angel wakes him up and says, you need to eat because you've got a journey you're about to make. Elijah eats again, and then he travels for 40 days and goes to the Mount of God, Mount Horeb. And he spends the night in a cave. And God comes to him and says, what are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah says this, I'm zealous for God, but your people have broken your covenants. They've broken down your altars. They are killing your priests. I am the only one left, and now they want to kill me. And God says, step to the front of the cave and watch for me. And there was a great wind that came through, and it broke the mountains apart. It broke rocks, but God was not in the wind. And then there was an earthquake that occurred, but God was not in the earthquake. And then there was a fire that came, and God was not in the fire. And then there was a gentle whisper, and Elijah heard God. Elijah, what are you doing here? Your people have broken your covenant. They have torn down your altars. They have killed your priests. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me. And God told Elijah, go back and do your work. You see, you're not the only one left. I have 7,000 more that have never bowed down to Baal. When we live in this world and we get criticism or we get threatened because of who we are or what we do, and we become discouraged about that, let's remember the victories that God gives His people. Let's listen for God in the quietest of times. Let's remember that we are not alone, that there are lots that follow and serve God. There's a second reason why we might feel really uncomfortable in our world and how we are living. Sometimes we go into a setting and we just feel uncomfortable. I mean, I don't feel like I'm in the right place right now for whatever this is. So Darla and I got married. We went to law school at Pepperdine. We moved back from Pepperdine to Dallas and began practicing law there. We attended church at the Preston Road Church of Christ. We loved it, and we loved the young couples group there. We got together regularly with lots of young married couples. The fall of 1989, one of the couples was throwing a party for all of the rest of us, and they announced it was near Halloween, so it was going to be a costume party. Everybody had to wear costumes. There was nothing more terrifying than to be invited to a costume party. But we were assured that everybody in the class was going to show up wearing a costume for Halloween. Somebody back in our hometown of Tahlequah heard that we were invited to this party. We needed costumes. So they gave us matching his and hers clown suits, okay? These were, the bushy, bright-colored hair, kind of silky clown suit top to bottom, even big shoes that we had to wear as clowns. I remember us having clown makeup. Darla says we didn't have clown makeup. I'm saying we had clown makeup as well. And I was scared to death. In fact, the night of the party, we had a detached garage. I was terrified to go out my back door and walk 15 feet to my detached garage, fearful that one of my neighbors would see me wearing this clown outfit. By the way, it was a happy clown outfit, okay? It wasn't one of these creepy clown outfits. We get in the car, we're driving to the party, and, the slogan in Texas is to drive friendly. Well, I'm not making eye contact with anybody because I don't want them to know that I see them seeing me wearing a clown outfit. We get to the party, we get out of the car, we go to the front door, we knock on the door opens, Darla and I go in. Brothers and sisters, we are the only people wearing costumes at this party. It was absolutely the most uncomfortable setting I had ever been in. This just didn't feel right. A few months later, one of the people in class threw a colander party. The idea was you bring one of the strainers out of your kitchen and you wear it on your head at this party. We did not fall for that, ladies and gentlemen. There was no way. So in Luke chapter 10, and by the way, Jesus put his apostles and followers into uncomfortable situations a lot. Not that they were bad for them, but because they were not settings that they had seen themselves living in before. So think about it. When your closest followers include a zealot, Simon the zealot, and Matthew the tax collector who was a traitor, Jesus is putting these men into uncomfortable circumstances. When he sends them to the village to get food and they come back and he is speaking to a woman and she is Samaritan, that's an uncomfortable setting for the apostles and followers of Jesus. When he goes to Zacchaeus and says, come down out of that tree, let's go to your place, I want to eat at your place, that's uncomfortable for the followers of Jesus at that time. Jesus tells a story in Luke chapter 10 in response to a question that had to be one of the most uncomfortable stories that his followers had ever heard. An expert in the law comes to Jesus and says, how do I gain heaven? How do I earn heaven? And Jesus says, well, the Scripture, what do you read it to say? And the expert says, well, you got to love God with everything, all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you got to love neighbors as yourself. And Jesus said, that's a really great answer. And then the man, wanting to justify himself, it says, what who is my neighbor? And Jesus begins to tell a story. Now, there's a PR professional here at Memorial Road. I had breakfast with her and her business partner a few months ago, and they told me that in any story there are three characters. There's a victim, there's a bad guy, and there's a good guy. And that made a lot of sense to me. Now, put yourself in the shoes of a first century Jewish individual listening to this story that Jesus tells. There was a man that was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he was beset by thieves. Robbers ambushed him. They left him half dead. They took everything that he had. Well, you clearly have the victim, and you have one set of bad guys. And then Jesus said, and somebody came along the road, and the people thought, here comes the good guy. Here comes the hero. The first one, Jesus says, is a priest, and it fit everything that the men and women in first century Jewish culture would believe. A priest is coming, he's going to rescue this person, but they were surprised when the priest kept walking on the far side of the road. And then Jesus said, another man came along that road. He was a Levite. And the people would have thought, maybe this is the guy. And this shows that we can all be the good guy and the hero in this story. But the Levite crossed on the other side of the road. And then the crowd was stunned, and brothers and sisters, they were uncomfortable when Jesus said, and then a Samaritan came along. Samaritans were not fully human to the Jews. They were truly the other. And the Samaritan stopped, and he cleaned the wounds and bound them up and put this poor man on his donkey and took him to an inn and cared for him for a day, and then left the innkeeper additional dollars that said, take care of this man, and I'll be back, and I will pay whatever is left. That would have been stunning to the audience that listened to Jesus. They would have been very uncomfortable in that setting. Jesus then said to the expert in the law, who was the neighbor? And the expert of the law would not even say it was the Samaritan. He said it was the one who stopped and helped. And Jesus said, go and do likewise. There's a third time where I feel particularly uncomfortable in the world, and that is not when somebody says something mean to me, or not when I feel just totally out of place in a situation, but when I just get rejected. So a few years ago, I'm going to Los Angeles with two of my work colleagues. Let's just name them Kent and Bob, okay? Let's just pretend like that's their names. And we get on the airplane. We walk right through first class, of course, back to coach. And one of them says, did you see who was up in first class? And I said, no. Gina Davis is sitting in first class. Now, young people, Gina Davis was a movie star, okay? She was pretty big time. And I kind of boldly said, well, I'm going to go meet Gina Davis. Well, she's in first class. I'm in economy. I'm not going to go up there during the flight. So I kind of say, hey, when we get off the plane, I'm going to go up and say hi to her. And, well, first class gets off the plane first at L.A., and it takes a while, so she is long gone. So we go out. We're standing on the curb waiting for our shuttle bus to take us to get a rental car. And one of my buddies says, you're not going to believe this, but Gina Davis is sitting back on that bench all by herself. And so I've got to show that I'm a bold guy. And so I tell one of my buddies, okay, bring your phone, come with me. I'm getting a photo with Gina Davis. And so I walk back to where she is, and she looks up, and I say, Gina, my name is John. And then I think, what am I going to say? I mean, this is really creepy, okay? Just saying, can I have a photo with you? So I think my mom might be watching right now. I want to apologize to her for this, okay? I said, Gina, my name is John. My mom is a really big fan of yours. Can we take a photo so I can send it back to my mom? And Gina says, no, John, I will not take a photo with you. I don't want anybody else to see that I'm back here. Rejected out of hand. So I go back. The guys are making fun of me. We go to Andy and Debbie Benton's house that night for a reception at Pepperdine for Oklahoma Christian alums and families. And I'm telling the audience about my encounter that day, and I say, I just want you to know I'm on a first-name basis with a movie star here in Hollywood. I did call her Gina. She did call me John. But rejection sometimes makes us feel very, very uncomfortable. And it happened several times to the Apostle Paul. Acts chapter 14. Paul and Barnabas are in Lystra. They are preaching away. Paul sees a guy who was lame from birth. Both of his feet were crippled. He has never walked. And Paul realizes this guy has faith. And so Paul says to him, get up and walk. He didn't get up and walk. He jumped up and walked. And the crowd went crazy. They began saying the gods have come down in human form. They were calling Apollos Zeus, and they were calling Paul Hermes because he spoke a lot. The priest of the temple of Zeus brought out bulls to sacrifice to these two guys. And they said, no, stop, that's not it at all. We are servants of God. They went from being admired and loved and held very high to the next moment, some Jewish men from out of town came in and turned the crowd totally. Paul was dragged out of town and he was stoned and he was left for dead. Sometimes we place our value in whether we are rejected or accepted, but the only place we ought to really place our value is that because we are children of the living God and He loves us. You know, Jesus actually prayed for us and His disciples. John chapter 17. He said, I am praying for my disciples, and I think this covers us as well when He says, God, they are in the world. Help them be in the world, but protect them from the evil one. But they are not of the world. And then He talks about how important it is that we are unified with one another, because that's how the world will know that Jesus actually came. So when you feel uncomfortable in a really deep way in this world, think about the victories that God has provided. Listen for His quiet voice. Know that you're not alone. Know that you are loved by God. And know that rejection is nothing to fear. You know, I'm so glad that students are coming back to OC now. I know this is true of the other Christian colleges as well. The other thing that we as followers of God have to do is we have to find community that loves us and encourages us in our faith walk. You can find that in your church, but maybe even more so in a small group, and certainly among those that you spend a lot of time with. Last spring, I met a young lady. Her name was Michaela at OC. I told a story about her last spring. I want to give you an abbreviated version of it. She had never left the state of California before, by a couple of serendipitous, I think, providential things, brought her to Oklahoma Christian. She and her mom actually got in the car in California, and they drove 2 nights, sleeping in the car in parking lots before they arrived out here in January after COVID had begun the year before. She had attended 2 years of school at Cal State Northridge, 43,000 students. She learned there that she had to get to class 30 minutes early if she wanted to get a seat in the classroom. She never met a professor. She didn't know any of her fellow students, and they didn't know her. She was anonymous there. She arrives at OC, and she is now at a college that has fewer students than her high school graduating class. And she kind of wonders where she has arrived. First day of class, she gets up early. She gets to class because she wants to have a seat. She goes to the door. Oddly enough, the door to the classroom is shut, but she opens it, and she sees a bunch of other students in there. And she's pretty amazed by that. They must be as dedicated as she is. So she goes in, closes the door, and sits on the front row, one of the few seats there was. And then she thought, wow, man, even the professor is dedicated because it's 30 minutes before class starts, and he's already teaching class. This is amazing. And then after a couple of minutes, she realizes this is not the gen ed class she was going into. This is an upper class engineering class that she has walked into 30 minutes late, actually. But the professor talked to her afterwards. A young man came up to her afterwards in the cafeteria, remembering her and meeting her. She told me that her experience at OC was amazing because she would go into classrooms and class would start with prayer. She was a cheerleader and she would go to athletic events and the events would begin with a word of prayer. She was a nursing student. The nursing professors would pray for the students before they took their tests. She was in Bible classes with people her age who were interested in God and talking about church. She had never been to a place like this. And I asked her, so what do you think about all this? She says, finding this place was the best decision I have ever made, and God is backing me 100%. When you feel uncomfortable because maybe the world is being mean to you, or because the world has rejected you, or you just feel out of place, you need to know that following God, hitching your wagon to Jesus, being around a group of people that will encourage your faith, prepare you for this world, and prepare you for the world to come, that's the answer to this. God bless you the rest of this week. God bless you the rest of this month and semester. God bless you the rest of your life as you also serve those who want to follow God. We're going to stand and sing. If there's any way that we can pray for you or you want to be baptized, if there's any need that you have, would you please come while we stand and sing?